We have Rhonda Logston, Executive Director, and Kelly Smith, Assistant Director of KY Spin. Take it away, ladies.
Wonderful. Well, thank y'all so much for having us. We're so thrilled, and it's a beautiful day outside, and we're going to get to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is special education. Kelly and I joke all the time that it's, I get too excited when I am talking about and going through the special education process. First and foremost, I'm a sister. 3 of my siblings have disabilities, from the seen to the unseen. And are smarter than I can wish to be, and all had IEPs throughout school. And if y'all will just give us some grace here, especially if we have any technical issues on our end, because our internet is not very strong, so we're not going to turn on the video. And if you hear any noise in the background, just feel like you're a part of our family. How's that sound? So we're going to kind of go through, I'll tell you a little bit about Kentucky Spin if you're not familiar with us. We are the Parent Training and Information Project. We'll go on to the next slide here. The Parent Training and Information Project, and we're sharing the handout to this PowerPoint in the chat there. Thank you so much, Kelly. And if you all have any questions as we go throughout, please use the chat or unmute, and because we want this to help you best. Just sort of a disclosure that this is for informational purposes only. This is not a train the trainers to present this material. We want to kind of go through and tell you we are, through the U.S. Department of Education, the Parent Training and Information Project for the state of Kentucky, and have been since Kentucky first received one back in 1988. I think it's important for us to tell you what we don't do as much as what we do. We do not represent families, attend IEP meetings. We are not attorneys. What we are is through a peer-to-peer support. We are all individuals with disabilities ourselves and or immediate family members helping one another, and really accessing information and resources throughout the great state of Kentucky, and really helping one another. So we're going to kind of jump right on in here and go over the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. It guides how the states and school districts provide specially designed instruction and related services for children with disabilities. It's in part funded by federal dollars. Again, there's state dollars too. There are different parts of that law. So Part C, which it drives my OCD a little crazy because they should have made our little bitty kids. Part C is the birth to 3, which you all know in Kentucky as First Steps. That's our early intervention system within Kentucky. That's under the same federal law as the IEPs, which is through the public school Part B, 3 through 21. We're going to concentrate just on the Part B part of it today, the 3 through 21. So you'll see here, I'm a visual person, and it's important to keep in mind because there are 3 major laws for children with disabilities, and you'll see here the big umbrella is 504 and ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. 504 is the 504 Act of the Rehabilitation Act. That is a civil rights law. Many children will qualify under that, where they may not under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But what's important to know is if your child qualifies under IDEA and has an IEP in school, they are also covered under 504 and ADA. But always keep thinking back, if you're a visual person like me, think of this umbrella, because a lot of times people may not understand that it's not just enough to be diagnosed with a disability. That doesn't necessarily qualify you for an IEP within school. And we're going to kind of step through that here right now. Now, keep in mind IDEA, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and ADA are federal laws. Then you're going to have your Kentucky administrative regulations, or people call them CARA. That's our state law. And then you will have your local policies and procedures, which will be the public school districts within Kentucky. Now, it's important to keep in mind that your federal law will always override or supersede your, if we could go back just a moment, Kelly, thank you so much, is that it will override the state or local policies or procedures unless they go above and beyond in favor of the child, or, and this is a big if and or but, right, is that they let the state or the local districts decide. And so when we're talking about special education and the law, it depends, a lot depends on individual, because every situation is different, right? It depends on a lot of different factors, but it's important to keep those things in mind. Now, in Kentucky, our military bases, and we'll show you here on the next one. So we have Fort Knox and Fort Campbell. And if any of our military families are on here, first of all, thank you for everything you do. But because Kentucky is one of the few states that still has the schools that are on the military base are not run through the state departments of education, which in Kentucky would be Kentucky Department of Education. So where we just looked at that when we were looking at the laws, if they attend school on base, then it is the federal law idea, and then it is everything is overseen through the Department of Defense Education Activity, or DODES. So there are a few things that may be a little bit different. Was a military family? Thank you so much. Well, and we just love and appreciate y'all so much. Now, if your child attends school off base, then you go by the guidelines that are with the state. We can always help you with that to understand maybe some different regulations or guidelines that are put in place. But I want to make sure that I do bring that up because that is very important for our military families. Now, when we look at here on the next slide, again, if you think back, because when I said it wasn't just enough to be diagnosed with a disability, outside of school. Under IDEA, the definition of disability is that it must show an adverse effect, that's key, that impedes the progress where educational performance is significantly or consistently below the level of children of similar age, non-disabled peers. You must meet the criteria of one or more of the disability categories and need specially designed instruction and related services. So you can see here from this definition why you are going to have a lot more children who are going to, you will have a lot less children that will be under the smaller umbrella. Now, on the next slide here, we're going to look at sort of some key principles of IDEA. Free appropriate public education. It is at no cost to you for your child that has a disability to be educated. Now, also, when we look at an appropriate evaluation, and then the IEP is the individual education program. So if your child qualifies, then the IEP will be written out, and you are a critical part of that team. Least restricted environment. What that means is that all children are educated to the maximum extent appropriate for their individual needs with their non-disabled peers. And procedural safeguards. There are some parental rights that are in place that will help you and that you can access if need be. So again, I go back to I'm a visual person. So looking at the special education process, there's the referral, evaluation, eligibility, the IEP, placement. You'll have an annual ARC meeting and then a reevaluation at least every 3 years. We're going to step through each of these sections to kind of give an overview about that. Now, on the next one, when we look at the referral, anyone can refer a child. Anyone who has knowledge or suspects that they may have a disability that is affecting them educationally. Now, You can, as a parent, a teacher can, anyone can. What's going to be important is, excuse me, you can do this verbally or in writing. We always suggest in writing, but send send the referral for the request, but you want to ask that the parental consent be sent to you immediately, because once you sign the parental consent for your child to be evaluated, it is 60 school days that they have. Now, that doesn't count weekends, summer break, holidays. 60 school days to have the evaluation done by. Now, excuse me so much. I'm having major allergy issues. When we look over here, you'll see for our military families whose child attends school on base, that is 45 school days. Again, it's going to be different, 45 school days, and they call it the parent permission to assess form. So it's really critical to get that consent signed, because we know the longer that a child, if they qualify, goes without those services and supports, that, you know, the sooner they get it, the better that they're gonna do. But now, when we look here on the next slide, if it comes back, you know, we love samples too, and there's a link, because Kelly had shared here a link to the PowerPoint, where you can access a sample letter. I love samples, requesting it, and you explain, you know, if they have been evaluated and been diagnosed with a disability outside of school, you can indicate that in there. Tell specifically things and your concerns, and you know, why that you're wanting them to be evaluated. Now, on the next slide here, if it comes back, it's critical again. You've got to sign that parental consent to evaluate. Now, if it comes back that the denial, if your referral was denied, there has to be a prior written notice provided to you from the school if why they will not evaluate. One of the reasons that we put here on there about child find, there is a part of the law that states and local districts are responsible to do what is called child find, which is if you suspect, they are required to identify, locate, and evaluate children if they suspect that they have a disability and may need services. So say it's denied, you're to get prior written notice from the school, which would be detailed. We'll show you here on the next slide here. You can then, or maybe it's not on this next slide, but I got myself messed up there, man. But when you have appeal rights, if they deny it, when they provide you the prior written notice, that one of the things that I would state in it that is part of the child find responsibility of the state and the districts, that you are requesting that. So even if it's denied, it doesn't mean that's an end all, right? Especially if you feel that it is important for your child to be evaluated to get the services. Now, the evaluation is going to look at and tell us what disability category that they would qualify under, how their disability adversely affects them, and what kind of specially designed instruction and related services that they may need. It'll help us develop sort of the academic and functional present levels that they have, any accommodations that they would need, and the evaluation isn't just one test on one thing. It's a combination of things. And I always suggest if you have had your child evaluated outside of school and you feel it gives a true picture of where they're at and their needs, ask that it be used in part as part of the evaluation. Now, the IEP ARC team, which Admissions and Relief Committee team, because in Kentucky we had to add an additional name to what we call it, right, is that you ask that it be taken into consideration. Now, it's not a said done deal that that's going to qualify them for services, but it's important to share that information if it gives a true picture of them. And again, it's up to you if you want to share it or not, but it may help the team, which you are an equal member of that team. When we look at here on, and Coco is going to give you some insight here too on IEPs, we're going to look at one of the things, you know, I get the questions all the time of what types of evaluations are used. Well, it depends, and we're going to show you the different categories. It depends on the category they're being evaluated under. Now, when we look at this, you may wonder, well, why did you put the IDEA categories in the Kentucky Administrative Regulations? Well, because if you remember back when we looked at the chart where it said, you know, the federal law always overrides or supersedes your state or local policies or procedures unless they go above and beyond in favor of the child, they let the states decide. Well, this is an example of, here, if you look the fourth down on the federal category is emotional disturbance. Back in 2004, when they reauthorized the law, they removed the behavioral part. Kentucky went above and beyond, and our category is emotional behavioral disability, which is really important and is a huge blessing that we kept that, because many of our children with behavioral disabilities, had we removed that as a state, they would not have qualified to get services and for an IEP. So it's important to know these, because many times I find that children may qualify, but they're not being tested under the right category. One of the categories here you'll see is the other health impaired category. That is ADD, ADHD, Tourette syndrome. There's a whole variety of things. Many times children, especially if they're under the age of 8 years or under, are tested under the developmental delay category. This is the only category that has a time limit, like you can only qualify under this category 3 through age 8. And then you'll either test into a different category or test out of services. Many times I find that children may just be tested under that and may not qualify, but they should have been tested under and evaluated for the other health impaired category too. So it's really important to know the categories, because any category that you feel that your child might qualify, when you send that referral, we talked about is you want to request one of the, I'll give you this example. I do really much better when I hear examples, is that if my child had just sort of some behavioral concerns that were going on, but they have ADHD. So looking at this, and socially they're developmental delayed, and if they were under the age 8, I might in my referral ask that they be evaluated under the developmental delay category, emotional and behavioral disability, and the other health impaired category. And why it helps sometimes to be specific like that, again, is because when we look here on the next slide, you're going to see that if the evaluation, this is also the categories that are listed for DODIAs, for our military families at Fort Knox and Fort Campbell that attend school on base. So I want to make sure you all have those too in case your child does attend on base. If the evaluation comes back and you're not in agreement, you do have the right to request an independent education evaluation at no cost to you. Now, it doesn't mean you go take them to get the evaluation, bring the bill back to the school, and they pay it. You do have to go through the process of requesting that. They will give you a list of outside independent evaluators. Now, when that comes back, that's not going to be a done deal set all. Our team has to take that into consideration as part of the evaluation. Now, what's important to know, and why I brought up about being very specific about the categories for them to be evaluated, because if it comes back, say if they were just evaluated under the developmental delay category and they don't qualify, when you request the independent education evaluation, that's only going to be for the category that they were evaluated under for the other. So if they had not been evaluated under the other one or under any of the other ones, that's not going to be part of the independent education evaluation. So you would have to start that process over. So it's very important because we know the more days that go by, the sooner they have services, if they would qualify, the better that they'll do. So just keep that in mind. It's helpful to any that you feel that they might. And at the end of the PowerPoint, we've got a lot of resources, links that you'll be able to access. One of those is, if I'm not mistaken, we put in there is the categories, where it not only lists the categories, but it tells you some information about those categories and describes those. On the next slide here, the IEP. So if your child's evaluated, they qualify. So the results come back. Now, just like you had to sign for your child to be evaluated, if it comes back that your child qualifies, you also have to sign and agree for them to receive services. You can deny them receiving it, but it is going to help them to be able to have those services and supports in place. So then what's going to happen is you all are going to, as part of the ARC team, you are going to develop the IEP, which is a written statement, is the services and supports that your child will have and receive. And we're going to kind of step through those sections of the IEP right now. Again, I go back to the visual, y'all. And my brother co-presents with me a lot. And he'll tell you like this. He said, think of it as you're building a house or building your school building. If you don't have your footers and your foundation right, and it's crooked, he uses better terms than crooked. But if it's not right, then everything you build from that is not going to be. So that's why the evaluation is so critical in your present levels, where a present level, where your child currently is. And then when you look at develop where your goals and objectives and accommodations are developed from that. And all of that is going to make up the whole IEP. Now, when we look here on the next one, the present levels, it's academic and functional performance. It's not, it is not just, I hear many times, okay, well, the child's too smart, or they're making, their grades are too good. Well, all of our children who have a disability are very smart. And it's not just about a letter grade. And that's something that's, when we're looking at IEPs, it's very critical. There are a lot of things that make up a child being successful in school. Academic achievement, of course, is part of it, but there are functional things as well. How their disability affects them in their involvement and their progress in the general curriculum. So it's very important, and we hound on so much about present level. Coco would like you to
get their presence known.
Yes, Coco would like you to know how important present levels are. And so when we look at this, we're going to see here on the next slide, we're going to see how when we develop it, it's developed by the team. You are such a critical part of the present levels because you know your child better than anyone else. And it's going to give an accurate picture of where they're at. It is going to also set the stage for the rest of the IEP. Always keep in mind when you're working on the present levels, if it is a strength, because it's just as important to identify your child's strengths as the areas of concerns in the present levels. Because if it's not in, and it's something that they need assistance with, if it's not in the present level, it is not going to be addressed further in the IEP. Now, something I do want to bring up is many times it is stated that Something that's important to know is when we talk about, you remember back that a child has to at least qualify in at least one of the disability categories. Your child's IEP is not dictated and should not be dictated based on the category of disability they're identified under. It's important to understand the categories so that our children qualify. And there's great information to gain from that could help you in developing your present levels. But every child is different. One person with OCD is going to be completely different than another person with OCD. And when you look at your present levels, you want to look at all of these areas, their academic, their social emotional status. So because sometimes I'll hear, well, my child just has a IEP for speech. Well, but is speech the only thing that they need help with? And what does their present level say? So yes, there may be some communication needs with the speech, but if they are having behavioral concerns, we want to make sure that under the social emotional status that it is indicated there. Kelly is I'm going to hand it over so that Kelly can talk. Well, first, introduce yourself, Kelly, because I just kind of rolled right into stuff. But please put any questions in here, but tell us about you, and Kelly's going to kind of pick us up here a little bit on it too.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Smith. I am the Assistant Director at Kentucky SPIN. I've been with SPIN for right at 7 years now, and I am the mother of a 26-year-old man with who has actually sustained 3 acquired brain injuries throughout the course of his life. Special education, as far as special education goes, I'm the parent that knew nothing at all. And so because I knew nothing at all, our road has been very difficult. So it is my mission to inform parents so that they don't have to walk the same road that I walked. So I'm going to dive right in while we're on to take us a breath for a couple of slides. And so when we talk about transition needs, so a student may have transition needs regardless if they're transition age or not, and they need to be identified in the present level statement. For children who are in the 8th grade or when they reach the age of 14, in the state of Kentucky, all youth with an IEP will have transition services needs identified in their present levels if they apply. So keep in mind, not every child will have transition needs. But once transition needs are identified, specific transition goals will be written in addition to their normal annual goals in the IEP. Those transition goals are focused on what that student will hope to accomplish, as well as their needs when they transition to adulthood from school. So this is going to look different from student to student, and it will really take into consideration their strengths as well as their needs, and those should be individualized for every student with an IEP. Writing the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So before the ARC or IEP team meeting, we encourage parents to ask for a draft of the present levels of performance, and then have parents draft their own. And we have a wonderful handy dandy worksheet that we give out to parents called the Parent Homework Sheet. I'm not sure if it's linked or not. If that's something you would like, by all means, let us know. But then have parents draft their own present levels of performance. Write a list of the student's current abilities, strengths, as well as areas of difficulty. And have the child share what they feel their current abilities, strengths, and areas of difficulty are so that it can be shared at the meeting. I also want to say that as soon as your child is old enough to begin to have some sort of understanding or input, they absolutely need to be involved in those IEP meetings. I'm not talking 8th grader age 14. I'm talking much younger than that, because these IEPs, they're all about them. It's their life, and they need to hear and know what's going on. So as they get older, they can sit in that driver's seat. Oh, I did want to say also, if a parent knows of an issue that is not stated in the present levels that they receive from the school, they definitely want to make a request in writing or in the meeting, and then make sure it gets included in the meeting summary, what they feel needs to be added so that it can be addressed in the IEP. Because as Rhonda said, the rest of the IEP is built based on that present level statement. Okay, considerations of special factors for IEP development. IDEA's regulation for considering these special factors read as follows. Consideration of special factors, the IEP team must, special factor number 1, behavior. In the case of a child whose behavior impedes the child's learning or that of others, consider the use of behavioral interventions and support and other strategies to address that behavior. So when the IEP team meeting rolls around to considering the special factors, the team might begin by asking, does the child's behavior interfere with his or her learning or the learning of other students in the classroom? If the answer is yes, then the team must consider the use of positive behavioral interventions and support and other strategies to address that behavior. The team members will talk about what the child needs and include this information in the IEP. And as indicated in IDEA, this will include consideration of the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports, or PBIS, and other strategies to address the child's behaviors. So determining what supports are needed. How does the IEP team determine what behavior supports might be appropriate and effective for a specific child? IDEA indicates that one of the roles of the regular education teacher on the team may include determining what behavior supports and other strategies would be appropriate for the child. This includes supplementary aids and services and program modifications and support for school personnel. So certainly functional behavioral assessments, or FBAs, can also play a critical part in determining what behavior support a child will need. A functional behavioral assessment, or FBA, is a process to identify the function of a student's behavior. The information collected during the FBA process should be used to create effective behavior supports and plans. Then special factor number 2, limited English proficiency. So in the case of a child with limited English proficiency, consider the language needs of the child and the needs and those needs related to the child's IEP. Then you want to be sure, be sure that when you are considering that, we want to take into consideration how limited English proficiency is defined. So IDEA defines limited English proficiency as meaning the same thing as the definition given in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA, which reads, the term limited English proficient, when used with respect to an individual, means an individual who is age 3 through 21, who is enrolled or preparing to enroll in an elementary school or secondary school, who was not born in the United States or whose native language is a language other than English, who is a Native American or Alaska Native or a native resident of the outlying areas, and who comes from an environment where a language other than English has had a significant impact on the individual's level of English language proficiency. And then it goes a little bit further into detail, but I'm going to go on just for the sake of time. But we also need to look at, is the child blind or visually impaired? Is instruction in Braille needed? Does the child have other communication needs? Is the child deaf or hard of hearing? What is the child's language, and how does the child communicate at home? And are assistive technology devices and services necessary in order to implement that child's IEP?
Well, and once we have a good picture of the present levels, then we're going to be able to write the goals that they need. And a lot of times I find I'm like, and I get questions, so how many goals do I need? Well, there's no magic number, right? It's individualized. This is the wonderful thing about the IEP. It's individualized based on the child's needs. Now, what I'll tell you is that it's going to do you no good to have 50 goals, right? It needs to be very specific, concentrating on the most critical overarching things that play a part in them being educationally successful. It's going to identify the skills that they'll gain. Again, I go back to the visual. Think of your goal as how you're going to get your goal. It's going to be an annual goal. How what you're going to accomplish within that year, how you're going to get from your first floor to your second floor. And again, it's going to be something that was identified in the present levels. Now, on the next slide here, we'll see that when we look at our goals, you need to be very specific, right? And we want to make sure that it's SMART goals. It's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. These are critical things to keep in mind when you're looking at this, because this is going to help you develop the roadmap for your child. And not just academically, letter grades, but functional development. Again, looking back at all of the areas in the present level and the areas where they may not be at the same level with their similar age non-disabled peers. What assistance do they need? How, think of the who, what, when, and where, how we're going to do it. Now, when we look at here on the next slide, you'll see that, again, it needs to increase in difficulty, right? You want to modify the conditions and the criteria that they have. So we want our children always working to achieve more and really sort of stepping through that process. Now, at any time, yes, you will have an annual IEP meeting, but at any time you can request an IEP meeting. And if what you're doing now is not working, or they're already going to achieve this goal within a year, you can request a meeting and have, you can request an IEP meeting and have that updated, because you don't want to work a whole year on something if it's not working or they've already achieved it, right? We want to always keep working to achieve more. On the next slide here, you're going to see that the objectives and benchmarks. I wanted to make sure that I pointed out objectives and benchmarks are not required under the goals unless they are on an alternate assessment when they reauthorized IDEA in 2004. Kentucky administrative regulations, lets the local public school districts decide. Ever since then, every IEP I've saw has benchmarks and short-term objectives, but just know it's not required unless they're on the alternate assessment. But the benchmarks are objectives. Think back, your goal is how you get from your first to your second floor. Your benchmarks or objectives are those individual steps that take you there. Every IEP I've saw since then has had them. It only helps all of us know how to help our children to achieve and meet their goals. Now, we're going to look at here next. When we are looking at this, because if you'll remember back that to qualify and have the IEP, you must need specially designed instruction, and that's part of the qualifying with that. It's important to know that the specially designed instruction has to be provided by a qualified special education teacher. And there will be, it'll be very specific. in who does that. But this specially designed instruction is specific to their individual needs, and that was identified in the present levels and through the goals. Their specially designed instruction is going to help them achieve their goals. Now, when we look here next on this, we're going to see, this is what the teacher does, how they instruct, assess, or reteach for the student. And it's going to be very specific, again, for them. One of the things that is important, too, is, the special education teacher is who does that does the specially designed instruction, right, with the student. But it's important, too, that they work in combination with the regular education teacher and the other team members, and because everybody plays a part in it. And they may do a lot of co-teaching together, and so that we have that consistency. Co-teaching is a very a critical thing for our children to be successful, where the regular education teacher and the special education teacher work together. Although the special education teacher is who's going to provide that specially designed instruction, we know too that it's going to help everybody. They plan it, deliver it, but working in collaboration, it's all, many times I always think of, if we're all working on something independently, but we're not talking to one another, we do much better if we're talking to one another, right? So it's very critical for the team then everyone has a role in it, but it is important to know that it does have to be a certified special education teacher who delivers that. Kelly, did you want to kind of go into the next one? And I know we're getting short on time. There's so much information to share, and we get so excited too.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, so a statement of related services. The definition under IDEA says developmental, corrective, and other supportive services as may be required to assist a child with a disability to benefit from special education. Related services is not a goal. It is never a standalone goal. A related service supports a goal. So what will your child need to meet their goals? So some of these related services can include transportation, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, or even parent training, if the IEP team agrees that the child will benefit from parent training. Different other related services, maybe interpreting services or psychological services, social work services, counseling services, all those different services, like I said, that are going to help that child achieve their goals. The IEP has to include the type of service, the service minutes or duration, how often they're going to receive it, the start date, end date, service provider, and location. So an example of that may be occupational therapy for 15 minutes, one time a week. It's going to start October 1st of this year and end September 30th of next year, and it's going to be provided by the occupational therapist in the resource room. So it has to be very, very detailed. Accommodations. Some accommodations are listed here, such as readers, scribes, paraphrasing. Individualized accommodations are put into place to help learners at risk and students with special needs to have success in their IEP or their academic program. So this is not an exhaustive list. There is no exhaustive list because everything must be individualized for the child, but these are just some examples. And that being said, it's important to address the difference between a modification and an accommodation. So usually a modification means a change in what is being taught or expected from the student. Some examples may be making an assignment easier so that the student is not doing the same level of work as other students, or shortened assignments. Students have to do the same work, but not as much. So an accommodation is a change that helps the student overcome or work around the disability. An example of that is allowing a student who has trouble writing to give his answers orally. That is an example of accommodation. The student is still expected to know the material and answer the same questions as the other students, but he doesn't have to write his answers. IDEA requires that an IEP include an explanation of the extent, if any, to which the child will not participate with non-disabled children in regular class and in activities. This is known as the least restrictive environment. Removal from an inclusive setting in their general ed classrooms with non-disabled peers is only appropriate when education with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. It is also very important to know that placement is not decided. Think back to our cycle slide. Placement isn't decided until the very end of the ARC meeting. And this should be determined after all the other information has been discussed. And federal law does require students to be served in as close to the regular classroom as possible with students who are not identified with disabilities. IDEA requires that an IEP include the projected date for the beginning of services, described and anticipated frequency, location, and duration of those services and modifications. That kind of repeats just a little bit what I was saying about those related services a few minutes ago. And then periodic reports. Periodic reports give us the progress that the student is making on each goal and or objective. Now, I do want to say that the short-term goals or benchmarks can be included in the IEP, but that is the district's discretion about whether or not benchmarks are added to the IEP. Progress reports have to be at least concurrent with report cards, but can be more frequent if it's stated in the IEP. Again, that's a team decision. But you want to be very specific when and how you're going to receive those progress reports and what information is going to cover.
Well, and I wanted, Kelly, I know that, sorry to interrupt, but I know we're getting close on time here. And one of the things, just because we did want to make sure that we had some time for questions, because we included a lot more than we are able to cover in an hour, even in the PowerPoint, because we wanted to get that information for you to have that too. But one of the things once the IEP is put into place, you will have the reevaluation at least every 3 years. For some students, they need that more often. You wouldn't have it more often than once a year, but if there are changes that occur, it may be very beneficial for a reevaluation to get an updated present levels. It is important too to make sure that the conference summary does have that the conference summary gives an accurate picture of what took place at the meeting, and that if there's anything missing, even if you all are not in agreement, it's important that it have that because your conference summary is to be an accurate picture of what took place. We're going to see if there's some questions right now, because we do want to give you all opportunity to ask those, unmute or put in the chat. And has this been helpful for you?
I will say that this is an insane amount of information to receive in such a short amount of time. But just like Rhonda said, we wanted to make sure that you have the most relevant information that you need to help your child or someone you know or yourself if you're a student, benefit from special education and understand what your rights are. So again, in that link, you can download this presentation. And while we're waiting on any questions to show up in the chat, I did just want to go through, we do talk about dispute resolution in this presentation. We do have links to a blank IEP and a team planner, a team meeting planner. And then at the end of the presentation, there are so many excellent resources, and these are our go-to resources. So when a parent calls us, these are the first things we look at. So we wanted to make sure to share those with you. And like I said, there are two whole pages of just resources, and all these links are clickable.
And one of the big things that we do with families is not just provide trainings, but we work individually, one-on-one with families, helping through the process. We work with families, youth, educators, providers. So any way that we can assist, please let us know. I'm not seeing any questions just yet, but one of the things too that I'll point out, because we can talk, we can talk forever on IEP, but again, just keep in mind that your child's IEP again needs to be very specific, individualized for them, not based on, you know, I get many questions about like placements. It's not based on your child's disability that their placement is decided because of the disability they have. It is individualized, what's appropriate for them, and really working with the school and with the team together. And again, building that relationship with one another, even if you are not in agreement on different things, but really building that positive relationship to where that you all can sort of work through that. And know too that if there are concerns, there are steps that you can take, and there are procedural safeguards that are in place and rights that you have as a parent to access. Not just access, but if you're not in agreement, you do have options that are available to you.
Rhonda, I want to thank you for mentioning that it has nothing to do with their grade point average as well. As a mother of a child who has autism, that was one of the battles I had to face going through 504 and IEPs, and even some school leaders are not well versed on that fact. So that's important for us all to keep in mind and push through.
Absolutely. Well, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that is one of, as a sister, my brother Grant, who is in Kelly, will tell you, and some of you all may know Grant yourself. Grant is, we get on one another's nerves, you know, brother-sister relationship, but Grant is brilliant. Many people judge Grant based on his physical disability. You know, it's not just with school, but with everything. It is something that as a family that you constantly are having to work in educating people and really advocating so that everyone is getting the opportunities and valued and respected just as they would anyone else. But I do appreciate you sharing that, because that is one of my big is that everybody has great things to bring, and we should not base it on a diagnosis that someone has. So I could get on a soapbox, y'all. Could y'all tell that? But we do appreciate y'all so much. And anyway, if you have any questions, please let us know how we can help. We are here. And again, like Kelly said, we didn't even get through a lot of different stuff, but what we did was a ton. But, you know, we are here to help.
please don't hesitate to reach out if you have further questions or if you need assistance in any way. And I guess we're good to let you guys go and give you back 2 minutes of your morning.
If you're in this session and you're planning to go to the next breakout session, you'll need to find that breakout session button again, and you can just choose the next breakout session that you're looking for. Or you can go back to the main room by hitting the leave room button, but choosing to leave the breakout room instead of leaving the Zoom meeting. Or the third option, if you are finished and you have no other sessions today, you may leave.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank
Yes,
you, Rhonda.
thank you all
And
for
thank you,
this
Kelly.
opportunity. Oh, thank you. Have a great day now.